Hello, everybody. The History of Storytelling webinar is going to start in a moment. We're just waiting for a few more attendees to come in. Hello, everyone. My name is Holly Tenty, and welcome to History Storytelling. Tonight's event is being recorded for future use by the Holy Cross History Department and the Holy Cross Center for Career Development. In May, I will be graduating from Holy Cross. During my time on the Hill, I chose to major in history, minor in film studies, and pursue a certificate in business through the Choka Center for Business Ethics and Society. After I graduate, I hope to enter a role within the creative development process of documentary film production. I chose to attend Holy Cross because of the history department and its opportunities for students beyond traditional humanities paths like teaching, law school, or becoming a historian. So many alumni have utilized the major to pursue an array of exciting and unique career paths. Tonight, you will hear from Holy Cross professors and alumni that are presently or were previously connected to the history major and history department. Every one of them are currently pursuing a career in digital media or combining this medium with their academic agenda. Their personal stories will illuminate how the core values and offerings of the history department have influenced their career and development. Along with this, everyone speaking tonight has helped me during my journey at Holy Cross. Whether it be a referral for an internship or mentoring me through a paper, I have been greatly inspired by each of this evening's speakers. Professor Steve Feinberg will now open our conversation and provide an overview of the Holy Cross CIS Film Studies program and how he has worked with humanities students in the past.
Thank you, Holly. So Holly wanted me to tell a little bit about the Film Studies program. It's a minor that is administered through interdisciplinary studies, which means that students who elect to do it take classes from at least 3 departments. And it's a minor we've had for about 10 years. And until recently, it's been a fairly quiet, small minor. At any given time, we have maybe 3 or 4 minors, occasionally a film major. But for some reason, at the moment, we have more than 20 students who have expressed an interest in the film minor. So we've suddenly exploded relatively. If you do the film minor, you take American film and world film, the 2 introductory classes that I teach, and you take 3 other film classes from around the departments, and then do an advanced film class, again with me. And another thing that's happened in the time we've been doing the film minor, administering the film minor, is that more and more film classes have popped up in different departments. So at the moment, there are film classes in all of the language departments. There's been one in history there for a while. There are a couple I just found out about from Holly in sociology. And there's one in religious studies at the moment. So students who elect to do this minor have a lot of choices, which is really wonderful. Holly's journey is a perfect example, actually a model in a way, of how this minor can work for humanities students, in particular for history students. Holly came to me when she was a first semester freshman because Ed O'Donnell sent her to me. She went to see him because she knew of his work with podcasts and on the History Channel, and this was the kind of work that interested her, and he sent her to see me to talk about film. So right from the beginning, she has had an interest in history. She came in planning to be a history major that is undergirded by an interest in media. And she took world film and American film for me. And then last semester, took her advanced class in documentaries. This was the perfect combination for Holly because of her interest in history. I've always found that it's particularly, I'm a film and theater historian. So of course I love history, and I've always been particularly excited by the possibilities for students of combining film and the media generally with an interest in history. And particularly in my world film class, I teach a number of films. They're the most challenging ones toward the end of the semester that show how filmmakers display historical context. This particular semester where I'm teaching world film, we're going to end with The Conformist by Bertolucci, which is about fascism in Italy, and Night of the Shooting Stars, which is about Italian resistance, and Grand Illusion, which I always end with, which is about class and the First World War. And I find it particularly exciting when I have history students who know something about these subjects or are very interested in these subjects, because they bring a kind of excitement about history as well as film. And is there anything else I wanted to mention? No, I think that answers Holly's questions to me, and I will now return to Holly.
Thank you very much, Professor Weinberg. We're now going to move on to Holy Cross alum Kate Benjamin, class of 2015.
Hi, Holly. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I really appreciate it. It's great to be here. I think one of the greatest joys of being a history major is the pure interest you'll always have in exploring museums, reading biographies, and just exploring the world. So kudos to all the people that are interested in history here tonight. I wanted to become a history major at Holy Cross because I enjoyed reading and writing. And I thought that becoming one would allow me to better understand the historical context on the world around me. Well, history doesn't repeat, it certainly rhymes. And becoming a history major at Holy Cross allowed me to explore these themes. One of my favorite projects I worked on while I was a history major at Holy Cross was my senior capstone called Slaughterhouses to Penthouses, the Transformation of Manhattan's Meatpacking District as a Microcosm of Gentrification. Professor Ewell was my advisor, and Professor O'Donnell was my second reader. So it's really full circle to be on a panel with him this evening as well. I wanted to pick a topic that I could see myself working on for a full year. I attended NYU Tisch School of the Arts a year earlier for a film production program, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But while I was at NYU living in the city, I would walk around thinking about potential topics for my senior thesis. And I thought about a lot of the people who couldn't afford to live in their apartments anymore in New York. So I had a lot of interest in the West Village, and then particularly the Meatpacking District. It was exciting when I would receive emails back from professors, authors, and artists who were willing to talk to me on this topic. And I even seeing how it's changed in the 10 years, I was lucky enough to talk to a few meat packers. I'm not sure they're even there anymore. I continue to see the neighborhood change. So that was a really fun project to work on while I was at Holy Cross. But going back a year, I had applied to a semester program, but I had a very specific one in mind, and it was at NYU Tisch School of the Arts. It was a film production program where you'd be fully immersed in the coursework as if you were a junior at NYU Tisch. A few of the professors on the call tonight, including Professor Conley, was a huge advocate for me. And I needed about 15 people's approval. So a big thank you to all of those at Holy Cross that made that happen. This was prior to a formal New York semester program. So I think we only had DC at the time. But while I was at NYU, I realized I enjoyed learning about the business side of media. And this eventually, I unfortunately dropped the camera professionally and focused on landing a corporate media role. My first job out of Holy Cross was at Viacom CBS, which is now Paramount, in their research department. I wouldn't have landed this job if it hadn't been for my Holy Cross history major. That eventually led me to my next role at Warner Bros. Discovery, where I'm currently a senior product manager. And again, the importance of critical thinking, comes into play daily. I do want to share a slide in a moment, but I did want to touch on the importance of internships while you're at Holy Cross. I think my senior spring, I had two, so I was doing 3 days a week. One in Springfield at ABC 40 and 2 days a week at WGBH in Boston. And especially if it's accessible, Boston by train, I'd really recommend leaning into those where you can. I think they really help add to the resume while you're still at Holy Cross. I also had a job at Pagano Media, and I'm not sure if they're still located in Worcester, but they were great as well. And I think they still do digital media. So if you're interested in that, Pagano Media was a great resource for me. I did want to do a quick screen share to show you this was a screen grab of when I was doing my thesis down in the meatpacking district. This was one of the last remaining, these two men here were part of the last remaining meat packers down there. And then I also took a screenshot of a still of one of my films at NYU School of the Arts. We were only allowed to do black and white there. So we had to do 5 courses, 5 films that no sound and no color. So really honing in on your storytelling there. Oops. Let me get back to here. Thank you. I've had a problem unsharing there, but yeah, so thank you very much, Holly. And I look forward to hearing more in the Q&As.
That was so wonderful. Thanks, Kate. Our next presenter is going to be Holy Cross alum, Riley Bloom, class of 2018.
Hi, Holly, again, thank you for having me. It's awesome to be talking to the history major department. This is just awesome. So why I chose the history major. So I actually had declared to be an econ major because I had planned to pursue a career in finance. But I was always interested in history. And so by the end of sophomore year, I'd actually taken enough classes where I felt like, hey, this might be something like fun to do on the side, really. I was not too interested in the econ classes I had taken and knew, I felt like in terms of applying myself in the classroom that maybe the history major would be something, good for me, both as a student and just to enjoy myself. So I actually ended up double majoring. And looking back, what was awesome about the history major is that with the exception of historian's craft, you can choose, the courses that you want to take. And so not all the majors were like that. So I remember thinking, fondly about that aspect of the major. So how I got into a career in film. So like I said, I was pursuing a career in finance. And after my summer internship going into my senior year, I knew that a career in finance wasn't something I was going to be passionate about. And so it was kind of back to the drawing board for me, which was actually great because my fall semester of senior year was really just about, reflecting and enjoying myself and trying to figure out, what would be best suited for me to do as a career. And it's easy to pin it as like, I enjoyed sports, but that's kind of what it was. And so I thought maybe I could try to do something in that field. And so at the start of my second semester, I pretty much just walked up to the athletic office and said, I'd be willing to do just about, anything in any department here. And so expressed an interest in helping out with production and ended up getting an internship there my second semester, the Holy Cross Athletic Office, operating camera for broadcasts of sports games, hockey and baseball and softball. And that was a blast. And so I was just kind of taking it one day at a time. And Kate, actually, I know that we had met in April of that year at a networking event in New York City. I think, Kate, you had done the IRTS program. So
Yes.
she recommended I apply to that. I didn't get into that program. And, I remember, one day I just was on Instagram and I followed NFL Films, which is the production arm of the NFL. And I saw their post about internship applications being due that Friday. And so I'll never forget that Friday night. I just banged out my whole application, applied just before midnight. And in my application, I spoke to a lot about the history major. And I interviewed and ended up getting the role. And so starting in August after graduation, I worked at NFL Films on the highlight show called Inside the NFL, where I was a researcher, a fact checker, script writer, and even an editor for the show's highlights. My internship was throughout the football season. So I was there from August of 2018 until February of 2019. I had then gotten in touch with a former intern at NFL Films, who was at ESPN Films. We hit it off. I ended up getting a gig there. And I was there for 3 years working on 30 for 30 films and podcasts as a production assistant. And my role was to help research archival footage, help get films ready for broadcasts. And when we had projects, done in-house by our internal directors and producers, I had the chance to go on interview shoots and help with interview questions and scripting and that sort of stuff. So actually one summer we had Holly intern for us, which was fun. And then last May, I left ESPN for an opportunity to work on an Apple TV docuseries about the New England Patriots dynasty, which I'm currently working on now. My role is an archival associate producer, and so I help oversee all of the archival footage that gets brought into the edit. So that is prioritizing footage for our loggers, locating and finding what's the most relevant footage to our storylines for editors, and also wearing all sorts of other hats like I did at ESPN. In terms of how the Holy Cross major applied to each of the roles I've had so far in film, I'd say that starting out at NFL Films was definitely, my ability to write and proofread, fact-checking scripts, because these were, this writing was, be on air. And so making sure that, everything we had said with statistics, was factually correct, much like, proofreading an essay. And I also felt like in terms of my writing at Holy Cross, you learn how to write, concisely with brevity. And I remember my manager at NFL, saying, why write a line in 4 words, but you can say in 3? And I felt like I had definitely heard that from a professor at Holy Cross too. When I was at ESPN, I worked on all sorts of different films, handling a lot of different projects because we'd have a lot of films in production. And so, 1 hour I'd be working on, the Tuck Rule with like Tom Brady in 2001, and then jumping to Bill Walton in the 70s to like Colin Kaepernick in 2016. And that felt really reminiscent of me at Holy Cross taking different classes in different time periods, jumping from, whether it's like a World War II class or to, Native American history in 1600s, just the ability to be able to adapt and just kind of jump with different time periods made that transition like in the workplace just like super seamless. And so that was pretty cool to see. And then I think also I really want to mention this, that in one of my classes with Professor Miller, it was our Native American history class. She had told us one class that, you know, we study history to understand why today is the way that it is. And I felt like with the 30 for 30 films that I worked on, these are all like high profile athletes that, you know, went through some sort of, you know, controversy or inciting incident, you know, in their careers that changed, you know, the sport or the team or like the culture in the world around them. So it felt like, you know, we're telling, you know, these athletes stories for a reason. And I'd always thought back to, you know, that statement that she had made, and it was just felt certainly applicable to the role that I have. And yeah, and now, you know, working on this project for the Patriots dynasty, this is a 20-year period, you know, spanning 2 decades. And so there's just an enormous amount of footage coming from the NFL, the ESPN, you know, ABC News, all these different sources. But much like a history essay that you're writing, you're condensing your argument. And so we have certain storylines that we're hitting on. And so we're not covering every single game that Tom Brady played in. So to compare that to my experience at Holy Cross in the history major, you know, for example, my senior thesis was about the rise of pirates in the South China Sea in the early 1800s. So, you know, I was pulling out, you know, all the books on pirates, you know, from the Dinan Library, but I'm not reading the entire book on the history of pirates. You know, I'm finding the chapters that are relevant to the paper that I'm writing. And that feels no different than what I'm doing on this project, because like I said, we're not covering every single game. We have storylines that we're hitting on. And so building off, you know, my experience with Holy Cross, you know, using your time wisely and just knowing what exactly that you're looking for and pulling that and helping, you know, support your argument. So yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for that, Riley. We're now going to move on to our last presenter before we move into a Q&A session, who is going to be Holy Cross Professor O'Donnell.
Well, thank you, Holly, and thank you to everybody for coming and our participants. This is interesting. It's always fun also to, you know, hear from our former students who are out there in the great wide world. So Holly asked me to talk about a couple of things. One is, you know, how I got into some of the work that I do besides researching and writing scholarly articles and books and that sort of thing, because I've basically summed it up this way. I've always been what we call a public historian. So even before I finished graduate school, I was, you know, doing it the old school way. I was leading walking tours of New York City. I was curating museum exhibits and doing stuff like that. And that kind of interest in presenting history to the public in a way that they can understand it, that it's not dumbed down, but it's also accessible and it's accurate. That's always stayed with me. And so that kind of ultimately led me, to make a long story short, into doing documentary film whenever the opportunity presented itself. And so I've done a lot of documentary stuff for PBS, for Discovery Channel, for Curiosity Stream, and for the History Channel. So, and some of these are you know, full-blown 6-hour documentary productions, like the one last spring that came out on History Channel on Theodore Roosevelt. So, because that's my kind of like my field, late 19th century history, and I teach a course on Teddy Roosevelt's America. I had a lot to say in that one. And that was a fun one because it's a docudrama, so it's different than traditional documentary. Since then they're now working on a similar one for Franklin Roosevelt that'll come out this May, and so I also sat for 6 hours in the hot seat for filming that one. There's also other things, I wouldn't call them documentaries, but they're sort of fun shows. If you watch anything on History Channel, you know that they've sort of gone in kind of hard into kind of fun history, but ideally accurate history. So Food That Made America. There's a show called Booze, Bets, and Sex That Made America. And there's another one that the one that week to week I'm typically in, which is Peyton Manning's Greatest of All Time. So he's the host, and it's sort of greatest candy bar of all time, greatest sports car of all time, greatest business leader of all time. So it's kind of a fun show. But on a more serious level, I've also done, more classic documentary stuff for PBS. There was a big 6-hour documentary on the Gilded Age, I don't know, about 6 or 7 years ago. And so again, that was kind of my field, and, they find you through your previous work. And that's how I ended up in that production. By that point, I had also sort of moved into full-blown digital media in terms of finding ways to reach the public. I used to stand on the sidewalk in New York and point at buildings and tell stories. And then at a certain point in 2016, I decided, because I was a real enthusiast about podcasts, that I would do I do my own podcast, because I love podcasting and love communicating with the public. So I started a history podcast, not quite knowing what I was doing, but that's I think, kind of a broad lesson about how you get somewhere is you just like dive in and some of the stories that we just heard about how, Kate and Riley got into their respective fields. A lot of it's just like getting one little gig, getting one little thing and then, you find you fake it till you make it, or at least you learn as you go. And then each of those things becomes a new credential. So I started a history podcast, and it was a ton of fun. I interviewed Pulitzer Prize winning historians and Ken Burns, documentary filmmaker, among others, for the podcast. Eventually, mid-COVID, I had to sort of put it on pause, and I'm probably going to keep it on pause, because I realized I couldn't write any more books if I was constantly interviewing people about who had written books, because those podcasts, I did everything from A to Z. So it took a lot of time, but I learned so much about, this kind of work in media. I also learned how to interview. I didn't, I realized, I figured, I could probably ask some good questions, but turned out, that's a skill that I didn't realize I had, and that I also then further developed. So podcasting, and the other fun part about it being a historian is that I knew from the moment I got in it that it was like being in radio in 1923, just a total wide open landscape. It's a brand new medium, podcasting. There's no barrier to entry. Every week, 50,000 people start their own podcast. There aren't any network. When I started, there weren't very many networks, and you had a sense that this was kind of a really cool frontier thing that, who knows where it's all going to go. So that was a great, fun chapter. And then another thing Holly asked me to talk about was, why am I, another dimension of it is, why am I on TikTok now? Well, part of it is that I have a short attention span, and I like doing fun things. And I'm also on sabbatical, but honestly, TikTok has many, virtues. And one of them is that people, do a lot of teaching on TikTok. So I like gardening, I like sports, I like, I don't do it, but I love observing woodworking. And, there's people like sharing their passion on TikTok. And so I thought, well, I have a passion for history and for telling fun stories. And in one of the dimensions that I do on TikTok is when somebody says something really stupid or false or outrageous related to American history, I do a little TikTok to correct them. So that's kind of my kind of broad reach of interest in digital media and things outside what we would consider the traditional historian's world of writing articles and writing books. And I'm, like others have said, I'm going to stop there and just we can pivot from here to the Q&A part that is always in some ways the most interesting, where we can get a chance to respond to your questions. So thank you.
That was excellent. Thank you very much, Professor O'Donnell. I now invite all of the speakers tonight to just turn back on their microphone and camera. And we're going to now just take some questions before we conclude for the evening. If you are watching the webinar right now and you'd like to send in a question, feel free to do so now. One thing I would like to get the conversation going with is a question for the collective, which is just about internships. Kate, Riley, you both touched upon work that you had done before entering digital media in different kinds of roles. This could be answered by one or both of you, or Professor O'Donnell or Professor Weinberg. In your opinion, how important do you view having roles before graduating from Holy Cross? And how do you think you can work with your history major in the present in order to gain those roles?
I would say I put a big emphasis on it, especially my senior spring. This is actually a funny story, Professor O'Donnell. I had I had to finish my science requirement, but I was also in your senior seminar. So because of that, and I had the 3 internships, you were letting me go 15 minutes late to your senior seminar because I was so back to back my senior year, because I just put such an emphasis on those internships, and my professors were thankfully very accommodating to little things that had to change with that. So I would say if you're able to get them, especially that senior year, just you're already going to be transitioning into the working world. So it was just kind of getting into that a little sooner.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, and it's not necessarily just tied to the history major, but finding out what you want to do finding out what you don't want to do is just as important as finding out what you do want to do. So I'm so thankful that like I had these experiences to, to learn from. And I remember just thinking like how bummed I was that, I wasn't finding what it is that, I wanted to do. And just, when you're 19, 20, 21, it's like the biggest thing in the world is like figuring out what you want to do. And in hindsight, it's like trying out different things leads you to ultimately that answer. And sometimes, it takes, I'm lucky that, I felt so comfortable right out of college, but, I don't think that maybe you ever stop, thinking that. So trying out new things and trying jobs and not necessarily thinking like this has to be, what I want to do. Is what I would say.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you both so much for your responses. Professor O'Donnell and Professor Weinberg, you both represent the Film Studies program and the History department. As you're seeing more people becoming film studies minors and you see more people moving towards digital media and combining that with history, what are your hopes respectively for the Film Studies program and for the History department in years to come?
You want to go first, Steve?
Well, what I was hoping, it seems to be happening at the moment. We have so many more film minors. It seemed at the beginning like just a kind of ancillary thing. I mean, a few students who were really enthusiastic about movies who wanted a chance to do more of it. And since we don't have a film department, I'm in the theater department, that would allow students to do that. But their enthusiasm for it really has excited me and moved me, in fact. I'm not sure this is quite answering your question, but one of the things I was thinking about, particularly when Riley was talking about his experiences, is that when students take a film class, they learn to read a text in a different way than history majors, for example, read their material for classes. That a history major, and this is true, I think, probably for most majors at Holy Cross, but it's particularly true for, I think, history and political science. They're reading to get information, which doesn't mean they're not reading closely. But when you read a movie, every single moment in the movie, if it's a good movie made by a good director, is very important. You have to focus on everything the camera's doing, everything the dialogue is doing, everything the editing is doing, everything the actors are doing. And that's a very different way of reading. And it seems to me the combination of that sort of close textual reading with the kind of research that a historian does really comes at the process from 2 completely different paths and creates a synthesis that I think is very enriching for a student.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying there, Steve. And I would just add to that the in in a different way, just within the history department, I've been there 21 years now. And so one of the fun things is that, I'm far from the only history professor that has gotten into digital media. So I have had many a class make podcast episodes, and students learn, the ABCs of doing all that. Now, several professors have gone into that because the support staff at Holy Cross is fantastic about that. And we have got the equipment and all. In two of my Montserrats, I had them make documentary films. I didn't know how to make a documentary film, but I said, let's just do it, craziest thing I ever did. And in both cases, it was just astonishing how it all, came together. And the older cohort of the first cohort from in 2017, when we did that documentary, I stayed in touch with them all through the 4 years. And then when they got to be seniors, I said, every single interview I have, within 5 minutes, they're asking me about the documentary film because they wrote about it. It was a feature of their transcript. And so I think and other folks in the history department have also begun to use film and doing other things of that nature. So I think it's a really good sign that we are, yes, on the one hand, a very traditional classic liberal arts college on a hill, but we are also, pivoting towards the needs and desires and interests of modern students. So I think both in both film studies and history, I think things are trending in the right direction. You do have to kind of tap into it, though. That's the key.
Yes, I actually have a question for those who are at Holy Cross. Why do you think the film minor has become more popular over the years? And are there more digital media classes now as well? Because I remember when I was interested in film production, I didn't really have the opportunity to make a documentary in class unless I went somewhere, I was doing it on the side with something.
There aren't. Actually, for a brief period of time, around 20 years ago, we had a filmmaking minor, but it didn't work for a number of reasons. But and it's now much cheaper to make movies than it was. Then we bought all this expensive equipment, and it became obsolete within a year. So it was part of the problem. But students do it anyway. Holly did a film as her final project in her Montserrat class. Mm-hmm. And she said, if you want to take a look at this, it was, she will be embarrassed to hear me say, superb, absolutely superb. And she did it with a couple of students. It was a dramatic film. It wasn't a documentary. So we've had, there have been people occasionally in visual arts who have offered some version of film production. But as for why film has suddenly become more, we've always had students who loved movies, and we've had eras where we've had very, very serious film students. I had a couple of students in the late 90s who took all these tutorials with me because they couldn't stop taking film classes, and there weren't very many at the time. But this is something different over the last couple of years, and I can't account for it except, everybody loves movies.
And it's been a boom in documentary film making and consuming, so that may also be part of it. I've, only about 5 years ago, I realized students were just watching documentaries all the time, so that was certainly not the case prior to that.
Right.
I don't know what the trend is, but it's exciting to see, definitely. So I just saw in the chat that it looks like the Q&A feature might be turned off. So if you're a student or a faculty member that is attempting to ask a question, just try to send that through the general chat right now. Again, apologies for that technical issue. It's really great that we're able to come together tonight and just kind of discuss this progression of how perhaps there might be a boom of film students to come. I think that a big part of my intention for having this evening was to combine the film studies discussion with the history department, just because both of those academic places are so combined in many ways. I guess just one question for you all tonight is, when I reached out to you with the idea for this webinar, what did you think? Do you think that this is a necessary conversation that we should be having right now? And if so, why?
I can just quickly say kind of a follow-up to what I said earlier, which is that it's where students, we try to meet students where they are. So, we realize that we want liberal arts need to remain relevant. And so what can we do as a history department, or, any other humanities department? What can we do that will give students confidence and ideas that you can love history and major in history? And, it's a cliche, but you can get out there and do anything. Now, you do have to do some things, as we've heard here, like be a little bit of a self-starter, be brave, and take on something that may just blow up in your face, or try holding a camera, whatever it might be. But, I think it's a very hopeful sign that we're moving in that direction, and students seem to be, responding to it. So I guess that's my 2 cents on that question.
Yeah, my answer would be that I joined, and I was, I didn't hesitate for a second to tell you, Holly, I would love to do this, because I felt that as a student, I would love to be on the other end. And so I feel like, based on my experience, I have something to give back, to the students, in the department. To, what Professor O'Donnell was saying, I think that with a lot of different other majors, you kind of have a little bit of an answer to know what are opportunities you can do with your career, like in certain fields. With history major, I didn't really know or kind of think about what I would be doing with it. And so I think that maybe there's students that should deserve to know that you can directly apply what you're learning about into a job. And that's been the case for myself. So
Yeah, I think there's a growing Holy Cross alumni media program. So it's great to connect with students and professors. And I really think, Holly and I have kept a close relationship this year as well. And I want to open that up to others. Please reach out to us as alum, because we always love to talk to you and hear what you're up to as well.
And it's been a pleasure getting to speak with you both, Riley and Kate, through the years. As I've been figuring out as a current student at Holy Cross what I'd like to do when I graduate. Exciting stuff. We just had a question come through from Professor Conley. It's for Riley and Kate. She's asking, are there courses or assignments you could imagine beyond what we've talked about that you think we could be offering in our department for our students that are interested in film or film careers, media or film careers?
yeah, I can go first. I mean, I know Professor O'Donnell, you're talking about podcasts, and Holly, you had done a documentary. I mean, just continuing to do, whether it's a documentary or podcast, like reinventing the way that different mediums in which students can present an argument and tell a story that's not just writing an essay. I felt like one of my favorite things to do at Holy Cross in a history class, and probably my favorite classes at Holy Cross to take, were like the 10 or 11 student like discussion classes that were 3 hours long, which like some kids at Holy Cross would roll their eyes at, but like just being engaging in a discussion of a topic that we're all interested in. So yeah, I mean that's kind of like a long-winded answer, but just hearing Holly being able to do a documentary about a thesis or whatever, like it's awesome. And I wish that I had something like that when I was at Holy Cross. So different mediums through media in which people can make use of what they're learning in the major.
I remember distinctly, Professor O'Donnell, in our senior seminar course, we were incorporating some films or scenes where we watch in class, and that was one of the highlights of my senior year, of how we could incorporate more of that. So I don't know if it's possible to ever have a course where it's World War I films, and I'm talking out like I don't what this could look like, but
Mm.
there's history within the history of the film. So it was one of the things I enjoyed about your courses.
I would love to
You
develop
know,
a history, film and history course. I guess I'd feel like I know the history. I'm not so sure I know enough about film, but maybe there's a way to, maybe there's a way to do something like that, or to collaborate with somebody, so there's all kinds of possibilities there for, because there is such a rich, just within the field of history, such an incredibly rich amount of material to work with, whether it's just a course on the Vietnam War, you could do an entire course there involving film. So there's a lot of potential there.
Actually, years ago, when I first came, probably around the time you were here as a student, Ed, Tom Gottschang in economics used to teach I think it was an honors class on the Vietnam War.
Mhm.
And he invited me in to talk about Vietnam movies. It was really fun. It was a great idea. Were you looking for volunteers for that collaboration, by the way?
Yes, indeed. I'm on
Please keep me
sabbatical right now.
posted.
well, maybe there will be a collaboration in the future now. We'll have to wait and see. Kate, Riley, you were just kind of talking about opportunities you wish you would have when you were at Holy Cross, and in your presentations, you were discussing a bit about how you apply your history major to the roles that you're currently within. Have you been seeing any trends recently within digital media, specifically within film, that you think are going to put history majors specifically at an advantage? There's such an interest in documentary filmmaking and podcasts, and that's so rich in research and having to have close reading and analytical skills. So do you think that being a history major is something that more Holy Cross students should consider, just from what you're seeing?
I see it directly relate to my line of work. I work for Warner Bros. Discovery, and they have a huge portfolio of networks now, but one of them is CNN. So if you wanted to work for CNN, it would be a great idea to be a history major. I think it's applicable to so many things in our world.
Yeah, I mean, I just think with the major, just you develop and learn so many different skills, from reading and writing, to research, to discussions, to presenting. I feel like you touch it all, in that major, and it's certainly applicable to, from my own experience, in the documentary space, I've only worked, in historical docs, so if you have that background and that interest, we're in the midst of a boom here. So, I think there's no shortage of, work right now, where you can kind of act on that interest. And, but, to what, Kate was saying, I think that, there's just a lot of skills that, can be applicable in the workplace from the major.
Excellent. That's so great to hear.
Can I just throw in one more skill?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we some of you folks have done marketing your major night with the history department. So that's where we try in, a couple hours to teach you, because you're smart and you know a lot about history, but you aren't, typically we discover that history majors often aren't able to kind of like have their 30-second, 60-second, 90-second explanation of who they are and why they are just dynamite and can do all kinds of things. And it's because of the history major. So we have this session. And so we emphasize these five, the five skills of, everybody can sort of cite writing skills, speaking skills, research skills, collaboration skills. But the fifth one we learned from our graduates a couple years out, which was project planning and execution. We had 3 alums come back, and they, independent of each other in the same panel, said the same thing. They said, I didn't realize that I was a project planner and executor. And, the other person said, they said the same thing to me. And now this is why I was put on leading this team. And, basically it starts with a 5-page paper, project planning. How am I going to write this thing? What's my evidence? Well, how am I going to organize my evidence? What am I going to do? How am I going to end this thing so it ends with a bang? That's project planning and execution. So don't forget those other, the project planning, execution, and collaboration are skills that that the world is very eager to see that you can claim them and show that you can do them.
That's definitely. And you may find yourself in a position where you are the best note taker in your future roles and everyone wants your notes. So don't be surprised.
I can second that for sure.
Nice. That's also great. We're nearing 8 o'clock, so I just have one final question. We've been able to touch a lot of different parts about the history major tonight and the film studies program. My final question for everybody would just be, is there anything that we haven't discussed that you think is important to mention before we close out the night? Or if you don't have that, what advice do you have for current Holy Cross students that are considering film studies or considering the history major with the intent in pursuing a career in digital media?
Go for it. Get involved in as many things as you can.
Yep.
I mean, Holly, you've done more internships than any student I've ever had, but look at how it's enriched your time here. And students who get involved, I'm sure Kate and Riley will agree with me. The more things students get involved in, the more exciting their intellectual lives are when they're here. And the idea of combining what's inside what we can provide at Holy Cross with what's outside is really extraordinary.
I would add to that a different way of saying something similar, which is create your own opportunities. We heard several examples, going to the athletic department and just saying, I'll do anything, right? And,
Sure.
Whether it's hold a camera or do production or whatever it might be. And you don't have to know the outcome. So the way you get into Holy Cross is you'd be very outcome, box checking way to get into, you do all these things and you get into Holy Cross. That's ultimately not how the world works. Often you just need to put your toe in the water or whatever metaphor works for you. Try something. You have no idea whether it's just going to be a total disaster and it's going to be a funny story later, but a decision that didn't really work out. But you also don't know that if you go to the athletic department or whatever it might be and try something, and the thing you start is absolutely not the thing you end up with. By some chance, you meet somebody or you see somebody doing something over in a different part of or because somebody calls in sick, you get assigned to a field crew and you suddenly see something different and you're like, oh, I didn't even know this existed. So create your opportunities, put yourself out there, and you don't need to know the outcome. You, in fact, don't know the outcome. Just kind of, let the magnetic pull, let it pull you and see what happens.
Definitely. And adding on to Professor O'Donnell, creating your own opportunities, even if they don't exist at Holy Cross today. I think back, if I hadn't pushed to get into this New York semester program that wasn't a formal program at the time, my college experience would have been very different. And I think, I would have been in a very different position I'm in now. So if you have an idea, run it by some people. I think they're gonna like your ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't know who all's been paying attention to the March Madness, but there's a junior at one of the schools, Jordan Sarnoff, who he is the head of media relations for the Fairleigh Dickinson University, the team that had the huge upset, and he's just a junior in college, and that's not being head of PR at Duke University, obviously, but clearly this kid knew what he wanted to do. Had a goal and has been busting his butt. And, this weekend he's going to be doing, the team's knocked out. He's doing, the PR for the whole, NCAA, for the rest of the tournament. So I think it goes to show that, this kid followed his gut and he got his foot in the door and, he kept it there. And so I think that with every opportunity that does come, whether it's, by luck or, luck is a result of design, I think people learn that you have to keep that opportunity. And so, when you get there, continue to know that, work hard and I just go with your gut, I think is my advice here.
Well, Riley, Kate, Professor O'Donnell, Professor Weinberg, thank you all so much for joining me this evening in the History of Storytelling webinar. I can't express my gratitude to each of you enough. You know, as a graduating senior, I feel like I've been here at Holy Cross during a very interesting time in our world and on campus. And while my career in documentary film is still fully yet to come, I feel confident that I'll be successful within whatever role I land by the time I graduate. And it was really because of your guidance on campus and then beyond campus to get through different internships and begin networking and really start to figure out what I want to do, that I'm at the place where I am now before graduating. So anybody who is a student who is attending tonight, I really urge you to look through this webinar and just kind of see that there are so many different ways that you can define yourself while you're at Holy Cross. And you shouldn't be shy, because you could miss out on a lot of different things during your 4 years here. So with that all being said, I hope everybody has a great rest of your night, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Holly.
Thank you, Holly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fun.
A lot of fun.